Hey, the Purple View. Welcome to this channel. Purple, inspiration, imagination, distinction. Purple. Now, folks, for those of you who are just tuning in to this channel, it's a channel that talks about anything building, architecture, interior design, environmental protection, landscape design, obtaining building permit, in short, anything building. Now, if you've watched our subsequent videos, our prior videos, we talked about differences between interior designers, architects, draftsmen, interior decorators. We did all of that, and today's video is going to be a short one, but is also a very important one. We want to look at 7 things that are key in designing a residence in Ghana. 7 things. Now, a lot of the time, clients come with verbal briefs saying, I want a 3 or 4 bedroom, and they come without a site plan. And, the perception is that we're just supposed to, make these drawings and hand them over, and they're given to a mason to just go place the building on the site. And more often than not, they think that the logical placement would just be for the building to face the roadside, and that's it. But they couldn't be more wrong, folks. Absolutely wrong. Now, I said in the beginning that I was going to talk about 7 things. So number 1 is the site orientation. Site orientation is quite critical, because in Ghana, the best orientation for buildings it should be north-south. Now, north-south would make the building the most comfortable in terms of your comfy levels in your interior spaces. You're going to have more free airflow by virtue of the fact that the building has been placed in the wind path. And also you want to place the non-habitable rooms on the western facade where the ingress of the solar radiation is high. So folks, as you can see, it's not a simple thing of just placing the building anyhow on the site. So that orientation is quite key. And it also affects the window placement to optimize, the processes of ventilation. I'm sure we'll talk about that. One of the things I'm going to talk about. So that's number 1, the site orientation. Number 2, shading. Shading is also very important, quite critical. Shading is done by providing horizontal and vertical shading on your outlets or your windows because of the direct ingress of solar radiation. So you can do that by using the building fabric to cut off all incidents of solar radiation, but also depending on the visual aesthetic that you want to achieve, and depending on the angle of incidence of the sun, you can decide to use just a horizontal or just a vertical shading device. So that is hinged on the angle of incidence of the sun. So as you're well aware, all this falls under orientation. Number 2, shading. Shading is also quite important. Shading can be achieved through the use of vegetation, landscape, the use of trees. Quite important. Number three, you want to talk about the use of wall materials, the materials that you're going to use for your walls. Ideally, I would have said probably you want to use that same material for the entire building envelope, but because of security reasons and the fact that we have issues with precipitation, a few things, you want to keep the blockwork on the periphery of the building, and then use materials like cement board, metal, or even timber. These materials retain a lot less heat So by using these materials, your interior spaces are definitely going to be cooler. Okay. Number 4, ventilation. Ventilation obviously is quite key, and you can't talk about ventilation without talking about the air change rate, which is the amount of time it takes for air to be replaced, the stale air in a room to be replaced with fresh air coming from the outside. So that process is the air change rate, which also goes on to impact on what we talk about as cross ventilation. And this can be achieved when we have two windows in a room. Um, so each room in the building should have two windows, presupposing that each of these rooms have two external walls. But there are a lot of instances, by virtue of the visual aesthetic or by virtue of the fact, by virtue of the functional relationship, in the interior space, sometimes some of the rooms have just one external wall. So you ask yourself, how do you achieve cross ventilation if you have just one external wall facing the outside? What you do is that you still have two windows on that wall on the extreme ends, and then you extrude one of the windows for about a meter, and that process forces cross ventilation by the fact that it increases the pressure. So the air is coming in from a higher pressure to a lower pressure, and that forces and augments that cross ventilation process. So that's for ventilation. Then number 5, we want to talk about the roof design. Now the roof design should be done such that there's a space between the roof space, the roof space and the ceiling space. And once that space is created, you also want to provide outlets or pockets at the eaves of the building. When I say eaves, I'm talking about the ceiling, the external ceiling of the roof, not the internal one, the external. So ventilation by stack effect, what it means is that the warm air will rise and get out of the roof through those pockets, and in so doing it reduces the heat load in your interior space. And then finally, the use of solar panels. The use of solar panels reduces your carbon footprint, generally, and which is equivalent to about 30 to 40 tons, of heat loss. And it also reduces the incidence of the sun directly on your roof, because by virtue of the fact that you're using solar panels, you're able to get about only 8% of that heat into your interior space. And then finally, obviously, you want to use LED lighting. LED lighting definitely reduces the heat load in your interior space, unlike our incandescent bulbs. Okay, so these are the 7 key things that you want to take note of when you're designing a residence in Ghana. So I just want to go over again. I talked about orientation, the site orientation. I talked about shading. I talked about wall materials. I talked about ventilation. I talked about I don't know if I talked about that. Bringing the inside out, external spaces, provision of external, where you sort of the functional spaces in the interior, you bring it outside, maybe like the lounge or dining, where you entertain people outside, you receive people outside. When you have a meal, you have it outside, and it reduces the heat load as a result of that activity that is done frequently on the outside, whereas normally you would have done inside. So that reduces the heat load. Obviously, you want to provide for vegetation, and all that, trees. I'm not sure if I talked about that though. So I just thought, in case I didn't, then that's it. And then I talked about the roof design, talked about the space between the roof and the ceiling and ventilation, that's like getting out. And I also talked about the use of solar, which will reduce your carbon footprint and obviously reduce the heat gain by virtue of the incidence of the solar energy on your roof. And I also talked about using LED bulbs instead of incandescent. So that will be it. Thank you so much. And if you have any comments or any suggestions or any topics or things that you feel that would help if we discuss or debate on, feel free to put it in the column below. Please subscribe to this channel so we can keep the information flow going. Thank you, folks. Purple View.